The galaxy believed the war was over. The Empire had fallen, the Jedi had returned, and by 25 ABY, the New Republic was no longer rebuilding, it was relaxing. Chief of State Borsk Failure cut military spending. Defense fleets were thinned. Outer Rim posts were downsized. Peace, they thought, had finally settled across the stars. They were wrong. Because something had been watching. Something not born of this galaxy. Something the Force could not feel. Far beyond the edge of known space, a species was studying the Republic like an invasive species dissecting its host. The Yuuzhan Vong. They came from elsewhere, not from the unknown regions, but from another galaxy entirely, and they had been here for years. Their agents were already in place. Their weapons were already growing, and their gods demanded pain. As early as 11 ABY, a man named Nom Arnor had begun stirring chaos in the shadows. He moved between warlords, sabotaged alliances, and seeded hatred across weak borders. He worked for no faction anyone could name, but his mission was clear: divide the galaxy before the first strike was ever made. And it worked. By the time anyone noticed, entire systems had gone quiet. Communication relays in the Outer Rim failed without warning. Ships vanished from well-traveled hyperspace routes. On some worlds, local life forms mutated not by chance, but design. Still, the galaxy didn't listen. Not when the Exgal Society lost contact with its station on Belkadan. Not when a Jedi Knight named Vergere disappeared beyond the Rim, chasing a strange signal. And not when Nom Arnor resurfaced in disguise, posing as a prophet and turning the people of Ramamul against their neighbors. The signs were everywhere, but the Force remained silent. Luke Skywalker felt at a blank space in the current, like a cold wind that never moved the leaves. The Jedi meditated. They watched, but they didn't act, because they couldn't feel what was coming. And that was the plan. The Yuuzhan Vong were not like the Sith. They didn't announce themselves with red sabers or ideology. They infiltrated quietly, slowly. Their weapons were alive. Their technology rejected circuits and relied on pain. And their hatred of machines was more than belief, it was doctrine. In the background, the First World was already dying. On Belkadan, a scientist named Yamin Kar had begun releasing spores into the atmosphere. They choked the ecosystem, poisoned the air, turned forests into coral fields. By the time his work was done, the planet would be unrecognizable, reshaped to serve as a staging ground for the first wave. And the New Republic still argued over trade routes. By 25 ABY, the pieces were already in place. Nom Arnor had weakened the Jedi. Yamin Kar had prepared the landing zone. The enemy had mapped defenses, and the Force, for the first time in living memory, remained blind. The invasion had not begun, but the war already had. The warnings didn't come as alarms or battle reports. They came as whispers, faint signals drifting through quiet space, carrying fragments of voices that shouldn't have been there. At first, they were dismissed as interference, the kind of noise every deep space receiver caught from time to time. But these signals had patterns, pauses, breaths, and then silence. The Exgal Society was the first to notice. Their entire purpose was to study the unknown, to listen to the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. From their station on Belkadan, the scientists of Exgal 4 monitored deep space anomalies every day. When the first reading came through a vibration in the void that didn't match any known phenomenon, they logged it as unusual, but not dangerous. Then it happened again. Stronger, closer. Without realizing it, they had heard the first footsteps of an extragalactic army. One of the researchers, a quiet man named Yuuzhan Vong, studied the signals more carefully than anyone else. He asked the right questions, made the right calculations, and predicted the path of the incoming object with eerie precision. His colleagues believed they'd discovered a new celestial body, a comet, maybe an unknown vessel. They didn't know that Yuuzhan Vong was not one of them. He had been planted there years earlier, raised in the traditions of the Yuuzhan Vong, shaped through ritual and pain to serve as a forward agent. And when the readings confirmed what he already suspected, the long-awaited vanguard had entered the galaxy, he acted. Quietly, efficiently. The station's messages grew frantic, distorted, terrified. Some of the scientists reported hearing something outside, as if the wind itself had begun to speak. Others described the sky turning a shade too dark, as though the atmosphere had thickened. But the final transmissions were the worst, a recording of their environmental alarms, screaming as toxins spread through the air. Then the voices stopped. Only static remained. Across the outer rim, similar disappearances began to form a pattern. A cargo ship bound for Dubrillion drifted off course and never reappeared. A survey team near the Coruscant cluster sent a final message about living shapes, moving between the stars. A scout group reported a gravitic disturbance so unnatural it shut down their instruments mid-flight. None of these events aligned with known threats. Pirates didn't erase entire ecosystems. Rebels didn't mutate plants. And even the remnants of the Empire no longer possessed the power to silence whole worlds. Something else was pressing against the galaxy, testing its boundaries, watching how it behaved under stress. Still, the Republic hesitated. They blamed local conflicts, natural disasters, equipment failures, anything that didn't involve an unseen enemy preparing for war. But some listened. A small circle of Jedi began piecing together the reports, the disappearances, the corrupted environments, the voices caught on long-range receivers. It felt like a shadow falling across the galaxy, not dark, but empty, a presence without a presence. And though the Force could not reveal the truth, the fear it carried was unmistakable. Something had crossed the threshold, something alive, something patient. And the voices from empty space were only the beginning. On Coruscant, the stars still looked peaceful. The sky lanes were full, the towers glowed, and the Senate chamber echoed with arguments that had nothing to do with the worlds already disappearing. Chief of State Borsk Failure stood at the center of it all, a leader born from rebellion, now wrapped in bureaucracy. Under his command, the new Republic had turned inward. After decades of war, it craved healing, not vigilance. And so, in the name of peace, it chose blindness. Reports from the Outer Rim were dismissed as local instability. Governors requesting support were told to manage their own affairs. Jedi concerns were labeled as paranoia. Intelligence agencies were quietly instructed to deprioritize unexplained anomalies in deep space. It wasn't ignorance, it was calculation. The galaxy wanted to believe peace was permanent. After Palpatine, after Thrawn, after the civil wars, there had to be an end. And if that peace required ignoring a few scattered disappearances on the edge of the map, so be it. Leia Organa Solo saw it first. Long before the invasion, she read the classified reports, spoke to system leaders, traced supply chain breakdowns and diplomatic collapses in sectors that had once been stable. But no one wanted to hear it. She stood before the Senate not as a warrior, but as a mother and warned of patterns that were being ignored. She pointed to Romamul, where Nam Anor had sown riots in the name of false gods. She reminded them of Belkadan, a planet that had gone dark under scientific observation. She asked what kind of peace let entire systems fall silent without question. Her words were met with applause, and then inaction. Leia stepped down not long after, not because she had failed, but because the Senate had chosen comfort over truth. Her warnings were buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, reframed as political dissent. Elsewhere, Luke Skywalker convened the Jedi Council, still small, still new. They, too, had sensed something strange, not a darkness, but a void. The absence of the Force where life should have been. But Luke was cautious. The Jedi were no longer warriors by default. He urged patience, investigation, understanding. Meanwhile, Nam Anor made his next move. He traveled to Romamul, under another name, a prophet of divine suffering. He preached the corruption of machines, the sin of technology, and he blamed their suffering on neighboring Osarian, fanning ancient rivalries into fire. The conflict escalated into planetary war, and just as planned, the New Republic was forced to intervene. But the distraction worked. While the Senate focused on stopping a manufactured civil war, the Yuuzhan Vong were preparing their real battlefield far from the core worlds, far from Coruscant's light. The trap had been set years ago, and the leaders who should have stopped it had talked themselves into believing it didn't exist. In the heart of the Republic, the warnings were not silenced. They were filed away, and the war in waiting crept closer. The first signs of the coming war didn't look like an invasion. They looked like accidents, small fractures in the farthest corners of the map, too distant and too quiet for the core to notice. But taken together, they formed a pattern that only the desperate could see. It began with ships. Merchants traveling between Dubrilion and the Cornuct cluster disappeared without a trace. No distress calls, no debris. Their hyperdrives simply failed mid-flight, as if something enormous had bent the path around them. Navigation computers showed impossible readings, gravity wells where no planets existed, ripples in space, as if the void itself were alive. Then came the planets. Belkadan's ecosystem collapsed in weeks, forests turned black. Insects mutated into shapes that didn't belong to the world. Climate systems shifted as if guided by an unseen hand. Yamin Kar wrote false environmental reports until the transformation was complete. When the Republic finally sent investigators, the once green world had begun to look like something grown, not formed. Elsewhere, small settlements reported strange encounters. Refugees from the Outer Rim spoke of starships that seemed to breathe, creatures that looked like warriors but carried no metal, weapons without circuitry, armor that pulsed like skin. Their stories were called superstition, rural panic, nothing more. But one event drew attention no one could ignore. Near the borders of Hutt space, long-range sensors picked up an object entering the galaxy. It moved without emitting power signatures. It drifted as if carried by invisible currents. Analysts debated whether it was a derelict or a new kind of smuggler craft. In truth, it was something far worse, a living vessel scouting the safest path into the galaxy. The Jedi tried to trace it, but the Force remained quiet, empty, as if the vessel did not exist at all. Luke Skywalker gathered the council again. They compared sightings, analyzed hyperspace distortions, and reviewed the Exgal transmissions one more time. They agreed the evidence was alarming. But without the Force to guide them, even they hesitated to call it a threat. They weren't the only ones searching. On Rumamul, Nam Anor's followers grew in number. Their hatred for technology deepened. Their riots spread off-world. What looked like political unrest was, in truth, the first ideological foothold for the invaders. Through chaos, the Yuuzhan Vong learned something vital: the galaxy was divided, exhausted, and ready to be manipulated. And then the moment came. A faint, distant strike. A world in the outer rim went silent for the last time, its final message cut short mid-sentence. The signal wasn't jammed, it was swallowed, like a voice drowned in deep water. The Jedi requested immediate action. The Senate delayed it. And the Republic continued to drift forward, unaware of the tide rising beneath it. The first signs had been clear, the evidence undeniable. But the greatest wars do not begin with explosions. They begin with absence. And soon, the silence at the edge of the galaxy would give way to fire. It began with a shadow no one could trace. A massive vessel appeared at the edge of known space, not launched, not built, but grown. It drifted silently beyond the planetary rings of Helska 4, pulsing with veins of coral and light, as if it were alive. It had no reactor, no control tower, no metallic hull. It was something else. A world ship. It belonged to the Yuuzhan Vong. Inside its walls, pain was a language. The crew spoke it fluently. Warriors trained not with technology, but with flesh. They bonded with amphistaffs, serpentine weapons bred to kill and adapt. And in the heart of the ship, Prefect Dargara stood in silent prayer, awaiting his god's command. This was not the start of an assault. It was a declaration. For decades, the Yuuzhan Vong had watched this galaxy, studied its strengths, probed its borders. They knew its politics, its fractures, its faith. And now, they were ready to press their first blade into its skin. Not where the core was strong, not where the Jedi held watch, but here a cold, forgotten system, far from protection. Helska the 4 was nothing more than ice. A remote, uninhabited planet locked in a freezing orbit. But for the Vong, it was sacred ground, a staging point, a test. They didn't just build a base, they reshaped the world. Beneath its frozen crust, they planted a creature vast, neural, connected to every Vong vessel nearby. It was called a Yamosk, a living war coordinator, a biological mind that thought in patterns and pulses, capable of linking ships in perfect harmony. It would guide their fleets, anticipate attacks, direct formations without sound. The Jedi had nothing like it. And when Dargara stepped onto the icy surface of Helska, his orders were simple: defend the Yamosk. Let the enemy come. Let them believe this was their chance to stop an invasion before it began. Let them die believing they had stopped it. Meanwhile, the New Republic remained unaware. Rumors circulated about Belkadan, about ships that went missing, about strange attacks along remote hyperspace routes. But in the capital, priorities remained political. It wasn't until a Jedi squadron detected strange energy readings near Helska that the Council authorized a response. They sent Jedi Master Kip Duran. With him, a team of pilots, young, eager, brave. Among them, Miko Reglia, strong in the Force, still learning, still hopeful. They called themselves the 12 Avengers, 12 Jedi, 2 military escorts. Their mission, reconnaissance. They didn't know what waited for them. As the fighters approached the frozen planet, scanners began to fail. Static overtook their instruments. Shadows moved across their readouts, too fast, too quiet. In that moment, something cold settled into the minds of the Jedi. The Force recoiled. The silence deepened. And before they could turn back, the Vong unleashed their first blow. The galaxy would remember the battle at Helska 4. But for those sent to stop it, it was never a battle. It was a sentence. Kyp Durran had felt danger before, during the wars, during the Empire's fall, during the time he spent under the shadow of Exar Kun. But what he felt over Helska 4 was different. It wasn't fear, it was emptiness. The Force, usually alive with motion and feeling, had grown still, cold. When the 12 Avengers entered orbit, they expected resistance. They expected a challenge. Instead, they found silence. Not even droids stirred. No power signatures. No warnings. Only the shifting winds of a frozen world and the breath of something hidden. Miko Reglia stayed close to Kyp. He was still young, still absorbing everything around him. But he felt the silence too. It pressed against his thoughts like pressure from inside his skull, not noise, not darkness, but absence. That's when the trap was sprung. From beneath the surface, a swarm of coral skippers broke through the ice. Not ships, creatures. Born and bred for battle, grown in dark chambers, guided by the Yamask's will. They moved as one, arcing through space without engines or fuel. No heat signatures, no emissions. But deadly precision. The Jedi barely had time to respond. Kyp shouted commands through static. 2 Avengers fell before their words were heard. Blaster fire sparked uselessly against Vonduan crab armor. The Vong didn't fight with tactics. They fought with instinct, rage, and the pleasure of suffering. In the chaos, Miko broke formation. He followed one of the coral skippers through the atmosphere, thinking he could disable it before it returned to the surface. He didn't know he was being herded, drawn into the Yamask's range. Closer, closer. Kyp tried to call him back. No response. Then Miko's fighter vanished. Captured, not killed. Inside the Vong base, he was dragged through halls of bone and sinew. The air was damp and alive, as if the walls were breathing. Warriors did not speak to him. They didn't need to. The Yamask had already reached into his mind. It didn't ask questions, it invaded. It tore through memory and feeling, seeking knowledge not through words, but through agony. Miko screamed, but not aloud. The pain echoed through the Force, distant, broken, and fading. Kyp felt it. And then, nothing. One by one, the Jedi fell, their ships torn apart, their minds overwhelmed. The Yamask directed every move with unnatural precision, linking each coral skipper into a single, living weapon. There was no confusion, no hesitation, only death. When the Republic received the distress signal, the message was already collapsing into static. A few words, then silence. They thought it was a failed mission, an anomaly. They didn't know what the Vong had learned. They didn't know a Jedi had been taken. They didn't know that for the Yuuzhan Vong, this was not a defense. This was data collection, calibration, proof that the Jedi bled like anyone else. And the Force, the one thing the Republic relied on, had never seen it coming. Miko Reglia did not understand what was happening to him at first. When he opened his eyes, he expected to see metal walls or a containment field. Instead, he saw living tissue walls shaped like muscle, pulsing faintly with each breath of the ship. The air was warm and heavy. The floor beneath him felt like the surface of a creature trying to wake. He was inside the world ship. 2 Yuuzhan Vong warriors dragged him forward. Their armor shifted with each step, plates of Vonduan crab that looked grown, not forged. They didn't speak, They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. To them he was not a prisoner. He was a specimen. Miko tried to reach out through the Force, to call for Kip, to call for anyone. But the moment he reached beyond himself, he felt the truth again, that suffocating emptiness. The same void that had chased them through Helska's orbit now pressed against him like a sealed door. The Force could not find him here. At the center of the chamber waited the Yamosk, a towering creature suspended in thick fluid, connected by tendrils to the walls. It had no eyes, yet Miko felt its awareness crawl across his thoughts. It was not curiosity, it was violation. The creature fed on the shape of his mind, seeking patterns it could use, battle instincts, training, emotions. Anything that would teach it how the Jedi fought. Miko tried to resist. He fought not with anger, but with memory faces of people he cared for, the warmth of the temple on Yavin 4, the pride he felt flying beside Kip. But the Yamosk twisted these memories, unraveling them one by one. Every truth became pain. Every connection became something the creature could exploit. He screamed, but no sound left the room. Outside the chamber, Kip Duran felt the echoes. Not full emotions, just fragments. Stress, fear, struggle, and then a cold drop of despair. Kip had lost people before, but the bond with Miko was different. This wasn't a pilot under his command. This was a student, a brother in the Force, someone he was meant to protect. He reached for him again. Nothing answered. Inside the world ship, the Yamosk intensified its assault. Its tendrils tightened. Warriors watched, not out of duty, but reverence. To them, this was worship suffering offered to their gods. Miko's strength began to fade, his vision blurred. But even as consciousness slipped away, he held on to one truth. He was Jedi. And Jedi did not break. But that didn't matter to the Yamosk. It didn't need him to break. It only needed him to end. When the final wave of pain hit, Miko felt something inside him collapse. A sudden flash, a quiet breath. Then stillness. No more fear, no more noise. And somewhere far away, the Force stirred with a faint ripple, not presence, but release. Miko Reglia was gone. And with his death, the Yuuzhan Vong learned everything they needed to kill Jedi. The New Republic didn't understand what had happened at Helska 4, not yet. The transmissions were fragmented. Kip Duran's report arrived, scattered and incomplete. One moment, there was static. The next, silence. The Senate requested clarification. Intelligence asked for visual confirmation. But no answers came, only names. Names of Jedi who would not be coming back. At first, the loss was treated like any other failed mission. A setback in a remote system. A regrettable casualty in a cold corner of the map. The official statement mentioned technical failures. Hyperspace distortion, possible engagement with hostile forces. But those who had felt the Force knew better. Kip returned alone, changed. He spoke little. And when he did, the words carried weight. He had seen a kind of warfare the Jedi were not prepared for. An enemy without presence, without fear. One that did not see Jedi as warriors, but as puzzles to be solved and discarded. Miko Reglia was the first to die in the war. He would not be the last. In the following days, Jedi Masters gathered quietly. Corran Horn, Luke Skywalker, Silgal. They listened to Kip's account. They read the reports from Belkadan. They connected the movement of Nom Anor with the ecological sabotage and the disappearances in the Outer Rim. The picture became clear too late. Helska 4 had not been a battlefield. It had been a test site, a staging ground. The Yamask had been the center of something larger, a network, a strategy, and now that strategy was moving forward, piece by piece. The Yuuzhan Vong hadn't just killed Jedi, they had studied them, and they had succeeded. The military command reviewed their options. Helska was a frozen, hostile planet, difficult to approach, risky to attack, but leaving it alone meant allowing the enemy to expand. Leia Organa Solo argued for immediate action, not just retribution prevention. If the Yuuzhan Vong were allowed to fortify Helska, it would serve as a launchpad for deeper strikes into the galaxy. She gathered what forces she could: volunteers, independent captains, one-star destroyer the Rejuvenator. A handful of Jedi offered to assist. It wasn't enough, but it had to be. Meanwhile, in the dark corridors of the galaxy, the Vong retreated into silence again. No new attacks, no movement. They had tested their enemy and found them wanting. The Jedi mourned. The Senate argued. The Force trembled. But the invasion had already begun. Miko Reglia's death was not a warning. It was a whisper one the galaxy refused to hear. His life ended not in triumph or sacrifice, but in a forgotten room, inside a living ship that bled like a wound. And by the time the Republic realized what that meant, the next wave was already coming. Ithor was not just a planet, it was a prayer. Covered in dense, vibrant jungles and towering trees older than most civilizations, Ithor had never been scarred by war. The Ithorians, known as the Hammerheads, believed their homeworld was sacred. They lived aboard floating cities, never setting foot on the soil they worshipped. For thousands of years, the surface of Ithor had been untouched by sentient hands. It was the last world in the galaxy where nature still ruled without interruption. A living garden, breathing with peace. But peace is what made it vulnerable. When the Yuuzhan Vong learned of Ithor, they didn't see beauty, they saw defiance. A world that resisted corruption simply by being alive. Its untouched forests, its harmony, its sacred silence to the Vong, these were insults, because the Vong did not admire life, they believed in pain, in control, in reshaping the natural world to please their gods. And Ithor's purity could not be allowed to survive. At first, the Vong avoided direct conflict. They struck elsewhere. But Ithor lay along a key hyperspace route, the Otaga Run, and its neutrality no longer protected it. Word spread that the Vong were preparing to move. Refugees arrived in waves, begging for shelter among the herd ships. The Ithorians opened their homes. They had no weapons, no armies, only compassion. The New Republic responded slowly. Bureaucrats debated the cost of defending a peaceful world. Generals hesitated, unsure if the Vong would even strike. It wasn't until the Yuuzhan Vong made their intentions clear through terror, not words, that the Jedi moved. Corran Horn was sent, a veteran of countless battles, once a pilot, then a Jedi. He didn't want to bring war to Ithor, but he had seen what the Vong did to planets they touched. What happened on Helska? What happened to Miko? And what almost happened on Dubrillion? He stood before the Ithorian high priests and promised to defend their world. But he knew peace wouldn't survive what was coming. A Yuuzhan Vong commander named Shidao Shai led the attack. Unlike most of his kind, he was calm, cold, disciplined. He viewed Ithor not as a tactical prize, but as a proving ground. He had lost warriors in previous duels. He wanted vengeance, not with fleets but with honor. He sent a message to Corran Horn. Meet him in single combat, no armies, no distractions, one champion for each side. If Corran won, the Vong would withdraw. If he lost, Ithor would fall. The Jedi Council debated, but time was already slipping. Corran accepted. In the calm before the fight, Ithor remained still. Its forests whispered through the wind. The priests lit no fires. The skies remained clear. And somewhere beneath the canopy, animals continued their lives, unaware that history was bending above them. It was not a battlefield yet, but something sacred was about to be shattered. The day of the duel arrived with no ceremony. There were no banners, no crowds, only silence, respectful, tense, and final. Ithor's jungle canopy shimmered beneath the morning light, unaware that its fate hung on two warriors standing on a narrow clearing above it. Corran Horn wore no armor, just his Jedi robes and the weight of the Jedi Council's decision. He had not asked to be a champion. He was not the strongest of the Order, but he understood the stakes. The Ithorians had no weapons, no way to defend themselves. If Shadow Shai wanted a duel to determine the planet's future, Corran would give him one. Shadow stood across from him, still and solemn. His Vonduan crab armor pulsed faintly as it breathed around his body. His amphistaff curled in his hand like a serpent ready to strike. He didn't posture. He didn't boast. He only bowed, a motion born of faith, not respect. This was not a fight for dominance. It was a ritual. Corran ignited his blade, a silver light humming against the wind. Then the Vong struck. Amphistaff met lightsaber with a hiss of friction and living resistance. The first blow was almost too fast to see, a curved strike aimed at Corran's chest. He blocked, barely. The second followed instantly, a twist from an angle that didn't obey human rhythm. The amphistaff was alive. It thought, reacted, and changed shape mid-attack. Corran adapted quickly. He shifted forms, using footwork more than strength, turning the Vong's aggression into openings. He had fought Imperials, pirates, even Sith, but never anything like this. Shadow's style wasn't elegant, it was purposeful, and every move had centuries of pain behind it. The duel moved through the jungle terrace in silence. No one interfered, no alarms sounded. Above them, the herd ships drifted. Below, the forest watched. Corran switched tactics. He feigned weakness, lured Shadow into a trap, then struck with precision not at the warrior, but at the gaps in his armor. His blade cut through exposed muscle. Shadow faltered, but didn't scream. He fought harder. Minutes passed, then an hour. Blood stained the ground, not red but dark and thick, from both bodies. Corran's shoulder burned. Shadow's side collapsed inward with every breath. But neither stopped. They had become symbols now. Jedi and Vong. Life and death. Then Corran made the final move. A feint to the left, a twist to the right, and his lightsaber found Shadow's heart. The amphistaff writhed and fell. Shadow dropped to one knee, and then, without words, collapsed. Corran stood over him, breathing heavily. The fight was over, and the war, for one moment, paused. The Yuuzhan Vong retrieved Shadow's body without anger, without retaliation. He had died with honor. That was enough for them. Corran believed the duel had saved Ithor. He was wrong. Shadow Shai's body was returned to the Yuuzhan Vong with reverence. His warriors did not mourn with cries or tears. They sang in silence, offering his remains to their gods with ritual scars and sacred whispers. He had fallen in combat, as was foretold. That, in their faith, was not defeat, it was transcendence. But the Vong believed in more than victory. They believed in balance through destruction. And for them, Ithor was not just a battlefield. It was a blasphemy, a world that existed in harmony with nature, without control, without pain, a garden untouched by suffering. And to the Yuuzhan Vong, that was heresy. They had promised withdrawal if Shadow lost, and they honored that promise in a way only they could. Their fleets retreated, but before they left, they released the toxin. From their warships, they dropped bioweapons unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Seeds of corruption spores engineered to burn, consume, and rot through even the healthiest ecosystems. These weren't bombs. They were living plagues, designed not to kill quickly, but to infect, to desecrate. The forests of Ithor caught fire without flame. Leaves turned black, roots shriveled. Vines fell from trees as if mourning the canopy above. The great herds in the valleys collapsed, their bodies twisting as the air turned foul. The jungle began to scream not through sound, but through the unnatural silence that followed. Ithorian priests watched in horror from their herd ships. For the first time in recorded history, they prepared to descend to the surface. Not to intervene, but to witness the death of the world they had sworn never to touch. By the time the Jedi realized what had happened, it was too late. The toxin could not be neutralized. It evolved too quickly. It devoured everything organic, tree bark, water, animals, microbes. Even the Force felt distant, flickering like a candle inside smoke. As if the planet itself was crying out and being silenced at the same time. Corran Horn stood aboard the Rejuvenator, watching from orbit as the forests he had tried to protect folded in on themselves. He had won the duel. He had kept his word. But it hadn't mattered. The Vong had taken what they needed: vengeance, knowledge, a message. Ithor was gone. Not with an explosion, not in conquest, but in desecration. By the end of the day, only patches of green remained, shrinking islands in a black sea of ash. The herd ships began evacuating. The few who stayed behind were lost. And the priests, broken by what they had seen, chose not to speak again for weeks. Ithor had stood for thousands of years. It burned in hours. And the galaxy, which once believed that nature could be spared from war, now understood what kind of enemy had arrived. An enemy that didn't fear death. An enemy that believed in cleansing. And that even the most peaceful worlds could be made to suffer. News of Ithor's death moved faster than the poison that killed it. HoloNet relays carried the story from one star system to the next, not as a military report, but as a tragedy. A sacred world had been wiped away, not conquered, not occupied, just erased. A garden burned for no reason but to prove that it could be. It wasn't just the loss that shook the galaxy. It was the message underneath it. That honor meant nothing. That treaties meant nothing. That even when the enemy promised to leave, they would leave ruin behind. This wasn't war. It was punishment. And for the first time, the galaxy began to feel fear. Not the kind bred from politics or power. Not the fear of superweapons or imperial orders. This was something deeper. A realization that there was no negotiating with what had come. That the enemy believed in something beyond reason. That they had brought with them a new kind of war, one that didn't seek territory, but transformation. The Senate was stunned. Some called for immediate retaliation. Others tried to downplay the event, framing it as an isolated act of vengeance. But the truth was obvious to those who watched closely. This wasn't about Shadow Shy. This was about proving a point. The Jedi Council convened in silence. They did not argue. They did not raise their voices. They felt the echo in the Force, a planet once vibrant, now empty. A wound, cut deep into the heart of life itself. For centuries, the Jedi had protected civilizations. Now, they were protecting the idea that some things should never have to be protected at all. That idea had died with Ithor. Corran Horn stepped away from the Order, not out of shame but grief. He had done everything right, followed the code, won the duel, but still, a planet had died beneath his feet. He carried that truth with him, quietly, alone. The Yuuzhan Vong made no apology. They vanished from orbit like ghosts, leaving only ash and silence. Their mission had been successful, not tactically, not strategically, but spiritually. They had struck at the core of the galaxy's belief that peace could be protected, that nature could be spared, that enemies could be reasoned with. Ithor had been proof of harmony. Now, it was proof of failure. The refugee crisis worsened. Systems along the outer rim began to fall back, fortify, isolate. Trust in the new republic began to erode. Worlds that once believed in unity now asked harder questions. How could the Republic stop something it didn't understand? How could the Jedi fight what they couldn't feel? And what would fall next? The Force had not warned them, the military had not stopped them, and the Vong were already moving again, choosing their next target in silence. On the day Ithor burned, the war changed, and the galaxy, for the first time, stopped believing it would survive. The death of Ithor was not just a planetary loss. It was a fracture, one that split the new republic across invisible lines no one knew existed until they were already bleeding. In the aftermath, the Senate chamber changed, not in architecture, not in seating, but in atmosphere. The hope that had once filled the air, the belief that the war could be managed, controlled, kept at a distance, had withered, replaced by accusation, suspicion, division. Some senators demanded immediate retaliation, full-scale war. Others insisted on restraint, still clinging to the idea that the Yuuzhan Vong might be negotiated with. And beneath those arguments, something colder began to spread: fear of the Jedi. Whispers formed in quiet corners that the Jedi had provoked the attack, that Corran Horn's duel, despite its intent, had led directly to Ithor's destruction, that the Jedi were making choices without oversight and dragging the Republic into battles it didn't ask for. For decades, the Jedi had walked freely, respected, admired, needed, but now they moved through the Senate building under a different light. Their presence stirred unease. Their silence was mistaken for secrets, and when the Order began planning independent missions to track the Vong, the distance between Jedi and government widened into something harder to repair. Mon Mothma was gone, Leia had stepped back, and Borsk Faelia, now Chief of State, filled the void with control, not guidance. He feared Jedi interference not because they threatened him politically, but because they could see what he tried to hide. The new republic was no longer united. In the military, command structure began to falter. Sector fleets were scattered across vulnerable systems, spread thin in a losing attempt to protect too many worlds at once. Defense coordinators argued over priorities. Core worlds demanded protection. Outer Rim territories were told to survive with what little they had. Some systems began to withdraw their support. Others declared neutrality entirely. The illusion of a single galactic government fractured into regional silos, each trusting fewer allies by the day. And the Yuuzhan Vong saw it. They didn't need to attack the core. They only had to press the edges. Every lost world became a test, not of firepower, but of trust. Would the Republic defend it? Would the Jedi respond? Would senators delay long enough for another planet to fall? Time and again, the answer was yes. Refugees flooded into safe zones, entire cultures displaced overnight. Trade collapsed along once secure hyperspace routes. Black markets flourished, desperation spread. And with it came voices offering certainty, even if that certainty was born of lies. The war had not just reached the galaxy's borders, it had infected its heart. Amid the rubble of Ithor, a single truth remained. This was no longer just a war of weapons. It was a war of belief, of identity, of who would define the future. The New Republic thought it was defending freedom, but freedom was already unraveling from the inside. Kyp Durron had never been a perfect Jedi. He had once wielded the power of a superweapon and used it to destroy entire worlds. He had once followed the echo of a Sith Lord and let grief become his compass. And yet, Luke Skywalker had given him another path. Redemption, purpose, belonging. But Kyp had never forgotten what war felt like. When the Yuuzhan Vong came, Kyp saw the signs before others did. Not because he was wiser or more in tune with the Force, but because he had lived in the shadows before. He recognized what it meant when enemies moved without fear, when governments stalled, when friends died while leaders debated. After Ithor, Kyp stopped asking permission. He formed his own squadron of Jedi not for diplomacy, but for combat. He recruited younger knights, ones who had already seen death, ones who believed the Order was moving too slowly. They called themselves the Dozen and Two Avengers, but they were not Avengers, not really. They were Jedi without a council, and Kyp led them into battle. While the Jedi Council deliberated, Kyp acted. He flew missions into Vong-held space, tracked convoys, liberated prisoners, attacked supply lines, not for glory, not even for strategy, but to show the enemy they could bleed. The Senate condemned his actions, called them unsanctioned, reckless. Even Luke disagreed with his methods. The Jedi were meant to protect, not provoke, meant to be guardians of peace, not initiators of violence. But Kyp didn't see it that way anymore. He had seen what patience had cost them. He had watched Ithor fall. He had lost students, friends, Miko. And in the quiet between missions, he began to question the code itself. What good was non-aggression when the enemy worshipped pain? What good was calm when silence only allowed more to die? The galaxy didn't want Jedi who meditated while planets burned. It needed warriors. And for many, Kyp Durron became that symbol, uncompromising, dangerous, and willing to act when others would not. Young Jedi began to drift toward his ideology. Not openly, not all at once, but the tension within the Order began to deepen. There were those who followed Luke, and those who began to listen to Kyp, not because they wanted violence, but because they no longer believed the old way would save them. Kyp's most infamous mission came when he claimed a Vong worldship was nearing completion deep in uncharted space. The data was unclear, the source unconfirmed, but he acted anyway. He convinced Republic commanders to launch a strike. The worldship was destroyed, but later it was revealed that the vessel may not have been fully functional. Some claimed it hadn't even been intended for war, that civilians had been present, that Kyp had misled the military for the sake of sending a message. The Jedi Council confronted him. Luke was there. So was Corran Horn. Kyp didn't deny it. He only said one thing: if I have to lie to save lives, I'll do it again. And with that, the rift was no longer speculation. The Jedi were dividing. Between caution and aggression, between restraint and retaliation, between the legacy of peace and the need for survival. While the New Republic fractured and the Jedi struggled with their own divisions, one figure moved quietly through the cracks, a shadow with a smile, a diplomat with no allegiance, a believer of a faith built on suffering. Nama Nor. Long before the First World fell, he had been sowing seeds, not in the outer rim, not in military outposts, but in the hearts of people who had grown tired of governments and promises. He understood something the Republic never saw coming, that fear spreads easiest through those who already feel unheard. He hid behind masks, false names, false causes. On Ramamul, he became a prophet. On Osarian, a negotiator. In the Senate, a whisper passed from one office to another, disguised as insider information. He never needed to raise a weapon. His voice was enough. Every riot he inspired, every protest he stirred, every conflict he quietly inflamed served two purposes: weaken trust in the Republic and strengthen belief in chaos. And chaos favored the Yuuzhan Vong. When the Senate argued over fleet movements, he encouraged local leaders to resist cooperation. When the Jedi debated their code, he released carefully crafted statements that painted them as extremists. When refugees cried out for unity, he fed them stories of betrayal, claiming the core would never care for them. He didn't have to prove these lies. He only had to make them believable. And after Ithor, almost everything was. Nama Nor understood the psychology of collapse. He knew that governments don't fall because of the first blow. They fall because of the fifth and the sixth and the seventh, delivered slowly and quietly until one day, nothing holds them together. He watched as senators blamed each other, as the military lost cohesion, as factions inside the Jedi Order began to question their own leadership. Every fracture was a victory. Every argument, a step closer to the future the Vong desired. He was patient, because patience is the weapon of those who know they will win. On Ramamul, he used fear of technology to ignite a movement. Simple tools became symbols of corruption. Droids were burned publicly. Civilians were radicalized. He offered them meaning, a place in a story larger than themselves. They followed him willingly, never realizing they were worshipping the first sign of an enemy that had already entered their system. In the shadows of Coruscant, he bribed staffers with nothing more than convincing arguments and promises of influence. He forged connections between senators who shared nothing except distrust. He spread rumors that the Jedi had provoked the war, that Luke Skywalker was hiding information, that Kip Duron's actions had been sanctioned. None of it needed to be true. Politics rarely required truth to take root. Meanwhile, every datapad he corrupted, every file he altered, every false report he planted shaped the Republic's perception of the Yuuzhan Vong. He wanted them to prepare in the wrong direction, to defend the wrong borders, to believe the wrong threats. Because misdirection kills more quietly than weapons. Nom Anor also understood faith. His own devotion to the gods of the Vong was absolute, but he knew others were easier to manipulate. He built cults beneath the surface of several worlds, groups desperate for purpose, for identity, for belonging. He offered them clarity, and they offered him loyalty. These groups sabotaged supply lines, interfered with relief efforts, spread panic. Every act small but destructive, every action helping the Vong without revealing their hand. By the time the Republic realized how deeply he had infiltrated their systems, the damage was done. Alliances had crumbled, trust was fading, and the war had reached a place no fleet could protect. Inside the people themselves, Numenor didn't just weaken the galaxy. He made sure it would break. The Republic was still whole on paper, but in practice, it had already begun to fall apart. The war was no longer about planets. It was about perspective. Every senator, every fleet officer, every Jedi saw a different war. To some, the Yuuzhan Vong were a military threat to be crushed with firepower. To others, they were an existential plague requiring caution and diplomacy. And to many, they were simply too far away to be real. This divide grew in silence. Outer Rim worlds begged for help, but their messages were filtered through political chains of command, each link slower than the one before. Some pleas never arrived, others were classified and delayed. Systems that once trusted the Republic began to lose faith. They weren't alone. Among the Jedi, debates sharpened. Kip Duron's actions had cracked something open, a wound that hadn't yet scabbed. Younger Jedi, raised in a time of peace, were now facing enemies who tortured and desecrated. Many were afraid, not of battle, but of being told not to act. Jaina Solo felt it. So did Ganna Rysode. Even Jason, though quiet, began to question everything. What did it mean to be Jedi in a war like this? Was the code still a guide or a chain? Luke Skywalker tried to hold the center. He called for unity, reflection, balance. But balance is hard to hold when the ground keeps shifting. Some Jedi followed his lead, others followed Kip. A few stepped away from both, choosing silence. Missions became fragmented. Decisions were made independently. And without realizing it, the Jedi Order began to resemble what the Republic had become. A fractured alliance, struggling to remember what it once stood for. And across the void, the Yuuzhan Vong watched it all. To them, weakness wasn't in weapons, it was in hesitation, in confusion, in the idea that belief could be debated. The Vong didn't argue in chambers or question orders. They obeyed, they bled, they adapted. Every defeat taught them something new. Every encounter gave them more to unmake. Where the Jedi doubted, the Vong were resolute. Where the Republic stalled, the Vong advanced. Their warriors were not just fighters, they were instruments of divine will. Each carried a mission not only to conquer, but to cleanse. And behind them, their priests sang to gods who demanded more pain, more suffering, more proof that the galaxy would be reshaped in their image. As the Republic debated border defenses, the Vong united their warpaths. As Jedi questioned the cost of their actions, the Vong prepared world ships to erase entire civilizations. The enemy was not just moving, it was becoming stronger. They had learned the terrain, studied their prey, unlocked Jedi tactics through captured minds and broken bodies. Their biotech adapted to blasters, shields, and starships. Their tactics evolved. Their ranks grew. And in the shadows, Supreme Overlord Shimura smiled. Because the plan was working. Divide the Jedi, weaken the Republic. Let the core question its morals while the rim burns. Let senators argue while refugee worlds fall. And let Numenor continue to stir the fire until the galaxy tears itself apart from within. Ithor had been the first lesson, but it wouldn't be the last. By the time the next assault came, the Republic would still have ships, still have troops, still have Jedi. But it wouldn't have unity. And without unity, even a galaxy full of heroes could be brought to its knees. Anakin Solo was only 16 when the galaxy asked him to lead soldiers into war. He was the youngest of the 3 Solo children, the one named after a man who became Darth Vader, the one who bore the legacy of power without asking for it. And when the Yuuzhan Vong came, that legacy didn't wait for him to grow up. It forced him forward. Even before the war, Anakin felt different. The Force moved through him like a current, stronger than he could hold. He didn't speak often. He didn't need to. In battle, he was precise, focused, unshaken. But behind that calm was a weight he never voiced, the quiet fear that he was becoming what his name remembered. The Jedi trusted him, not because of his bloodline, but because of his clarity. He didn't hesitate. He acted. Missions that others questioned, he accepted. Risks that felt unreasonable to the Council were, to him, necessary. He saw what was coming. When the Vong began reshaping worlds, Anakin volunteered to lead strike teams, small groups, deep incursions, sabotage, rescue. His first major operation was on Dantooine, a refugee world under siege. The grasslands burned. Vong warriors closed in. Jedi defenses began to crumble. Anakin held the line longer than anyone expected. Because he didn't retreat, even when the others told him to. His lightsaber wasn't elegant, it was efficient. Every move had purpose. Every strike bought time. And when the Jedi withdrew, when the survivors fled into orbit, Anakin was the last to board the ship, his robe singed, his arms shaking, but his expression unchanged. He had saved thousands, and he said nothing. That silence began to worry those around him. Tahiri, his closest friend, noticed it first. She had grown up with him, trained beside him. She saw the change in his eyes, the way they stared longer after missions, as if watching ghosts. He still smiled, but it didn't reach his voice. He spoke less, fought more, and every success seemed to leave him colder. The Council praised him. They needed heroes, and Anakin was becoming one. But even heroes bleed. On one mission, he disobeyed direct orders to save civilians trapped in a collapsing settlement. He succeeded, but at a cost. Half his squad was wounded. The Senate demanded answers. Some accused him of recklessness, others called it compassion. Anakin said only one thing: they were alive. That was enough. Luke saw the storm building inside him. He tried to counsel Anakin, to remind him that leadership wasn't only about outcomes, but about trust, about rest, about limits. But Anakin didn't believe in limits anymore. The war didn't offer time to rest, it didn't reward patience, and he knew deep down that something darker was coming. The Vong were not finished. And if the Jedi waited, if they hesitated, the galaxy would pay for it. So he kept going, mission after mission, burden after burden. And with every step, the Force grew quieter, as if it, too, was unsure of where he was headed. Anakin never asked for this path. But once he stepped onto it, he never looked back. Jaina Solo never wanted to be a soldier. She was a pilot, an engineer, a Jedi who loved speed, precision, and the quiet joy of solving problems that others called impossible. Her mind worked like a starfighter's flight computer, fast, focused, exact. She could take apart a hyperdrive in less than an hour and rebuild it faster. Her world had always been motion, mechanics, and logic. But war doesn't care what you want. When the Yuuzhan Vong came, Jaina became Red Leader before she had time to say no. Starfighter squadrons needed Jedi reflexes. She had them. The military needed someone who could lead under fire. She didn't ask questions. She just flew. The first time she saw a coral skipper up close, it moved like nothing she'd ever faced. Living ships, no droid brains, no engines, no patterns to follow, only instinct. She adapted quickly because she had to. Her commands were crisp, her tone cold, and her kill count climbed. She didn't celebrate. In the cockpit, she felt clarity. On the ground, she felt nothing. The war began to change her in ways even she couldn't measure. She stopped cracking jokes, stopped letting her hair down. She learned to read field reports like they were maps to survival. When new tech arrived, she tested it herself before trusting it. She modified her starfighters' systems so they would never stall even under bioplasma fire. Her squadron noticed. They started calling her the Sword of the Jedi. At first, it was half respect, half myth. But Jaina didn't correct them. She leaned into the image even when she didn't understand it. A blade was simple. A blade didn't ask why. The council praised her efficiency. Generals requested her by name. But her family saw the cracks. Leia watched her daughter grow more distant, not rebellious, but unreachable. The warmth that once filled her voice had faded. Jaina didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just kept moving from mission to mission, from loss to loss. Han tried to reach her after Ithor, tried to talk about Chewbacca, about Anakin. But Jaina didn't open up. She sat in silence, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport, calculating angles no one else could see. When the mission on Garki failed, when half her squadron was lost in a failed ambush, she didn't grieve. She requested a replacement wing and flew again the next day. She said she was fine. But the Force told another story. Jaina had started to feel distant, not from people but from herself. Each battle left her more focused but less human. The clarity she once found in motion now came only through survival. And she had stopped asking what she was becoming. Was she still a Jedi? Or just another weapon? Kip Duron encouraged her. He said she had what it took to win. That hesitation was dangerous. That doubt would get people killed. Luke tried to remind her of balance. That compassion was not weakness. Jaina nodded. But she kept flying. She kept fighting. And with each passing day, the line between duty and identity blurred. She wasn't chasing peace anymore. She was trying not to disappear. Jacen Solo had always believed that answers lived in the Force. As a boy, he felt its presence like a calm wind moving through every living thing. Where Anakin acted and Jaina calculated, Jacen questioned. Not because he doubted the Jedi path, but because he wanted to understand it. He searched for meaning in every lesson, every mission, every moment of stillness. But when the Yuuzhan Vong came, the stillness turned into something else. Silence. For the first time in his life, the Force did not speak clearly. It flickered around the edges of his awareness, faint, inconsistent, uncertain. The Vong gave off no presence, no warning, no echo of life. To Jacen, they were voids, hollow places in the current, and that emptiness frightened him more than their weapons ever could. Jacen tried to explain it to Luke, to the Council, to anyone who would listen, but the galaxy was burning, and no one had time for philosophy. They needed fighters, not thinkers. Leaders, not dreamers. Jacen did fight. He joined missions. He saved lives. But each battle left him with more questions than answers. He could sense fear in allies, pain in refugees, anger in soldiers. But when he reached for guidance in the Force, he felt only distance. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The more the conflict grew, the more Jacen wrestled with a truth he didn't want to face, that the Jedi teachings he held on to might not be enough. Not for this enemy, not for this war, and the idea terrified him. He watched Anakin grow harder, watched Jaina fly with increasing precision and decreasing emotion. To him, they were changing faster than the war itself, becoming creatures of reaction, shaped by fear of what they might lose next. He didn't want to follow that path, but the alternative felt just as dangerous. During the mission to Garki, Jacen saw something he could not unsee, a glimpse of how far the Vong were willing to distort nature to carve the galaxy in their image. Fields corrupted, creatures twisted into weapons, pain embedded into the very soil. It shattered something inside him. After that mission, he avoided combat when he could. He volunteered for rescue operations, healing efforts, negotiations, anything that didn't require him to raise his blade. But even then, the silence followed him. Refugees asked him questions he couldn't answer. Knights looked to him for reassurance he couldn't give. His doubt deepened. Luke tried to guide him, told him that the Force was still present, only quieter, harder to hear through so much suffering. But Jacen sensed something else beneath that explanation. A shifting, a warning, as if the Force itself was struggling to decide how the galaxy should survive what was coming. And then came the moment that broke him further. At Ithor, Jacen felt the planet die. Not through sight, not through sound, but through the Force, a sudden collapse, like a candle snuffed out by a cold wind. He felt every creature fade, every tree burn, every breath end. It was overwhelming, paralyzing, wrong. After that, he could no longer pretend the path was clear. He began questioning not just strategy, but purpose. Why was the Force silent? Why did it allow such destruction? Why did it not warn them? And if the Force could not protect an entire world, what did that mean for the Jedi? Jacen was not losing faith. He was losing certainty. And in war, certainty is often the only thing that keeps a person standing. Anakin led from the front. Jaina fought from above. Jacen questioned from within. They were the children of heroes, born into peace, trained in war, and trusted before they had time to grow. Each of them carried a legacy shaped by rebellion, by the fall of the Empire, by the weight of names that meant something to everyone but themselves. But the war was changing them. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't offer time to reflect. And in the shadows of every victory, a wound opened deeper, one that no healer, Jedi or otherwise, could reach. The bond between the siblings had once been unshakable. They finished each other's thoughts, played together in the halls of the Jedi Praxium, laughed through lessons, argued over missions with the casual ease of those who believed the galaxy would always stay whole. But the war carved them apart slowly. It wasn't just distance, it was direction. Anakin pushed harder, drove deeper into enemy territory, seeking results the Council wasn't prepared to demand. He stopped waiting for orders, started assembling strike teams, volunteering for the most dangerous objectives before others could be assigned. He didn't say it aloud, but he believed something none of them wanted to admit. That if they didn't act now, the war would become unwinnable. Jaina watched from above. She saw systems collapse, missions fail, pilots burn. Her starfighter became her armor, her only constant. And every time she lost a wingmate, she hardened another layer around herself. Her compassion turned inward. Her focus sharpened. She never blamed Anakin, never questioned Jacen, but she stopped needing them. And Jason? He drifted further with each passing week, not from love, but from belief. He still trusted his siblings. He still cared. But he no longer felt sure they were fighting the right war or using the right tools to win it. He feared what they were becoming. And in quiet moments, he feared what he might become if he followed them. The breaking point came without ceremony. After a mission gone wrong, another system lost, more lives buried under debris and silence, they stood together on a landing pad at Eclipse Base. No words, just tired eyes. The kind that had seen too much, too fast. Anakin said they needed to go back out, that they had leads on Vong movement near the Coruscant cluster. Jaina agreed. She was already halfway through prepping her squadron. Jason stayed quiet. Then, finally, he spoke. What if we're only making it worse? Neither answered, because neither could. They were too far down the path now. Too many lives had already been lost. Too much had already been sacrificed. Doubt, at that point, felt like betrayal. Jason walked away first. Anakin left next, heading straight to the hangar without looking back. Jaina remained for a moment longer, watching the stars beyond the durasteel ceiling. Then she, too, disappeared into the war. From that point forward, they still fought together. But something between them had changed. The war wasn't just tearing the galaxy apart. It was rewriting the children of the Force into something new, something uncertain. And none of them knew what would be left of themselves when it was over. They had always been strongest as three. But now, they were three paths, moving toward different ends. The fall didn't begin with an explosion. It began with silence. Orbiting satellites went dark. Long-range sensors returned nothing but static. The holonet slowed, then stopped. On Coruscant, no one panicked, not at first. They assumed it was a systems glitch. A minor fault. Another bureaucratic error on a planet that had run on chaos for millennia. But above them, the sky was changing. Through the atmosphere, streaks of organic flame began to tear across the darkness. Dozens, then hundreds. Yuuzhan Vong landing craft, not metal, not designed bread. Screaming down through Coruscant's clouds like falling creatures, trailing bioplasma and shrieks that weren't made by engines. By the time the alarms sounded, it was already too late. The shield grid failed first, not from sabotage, but from within. Coral growth spread along the emitter arrays, infestations, planted by agents months earlier. Entire defense stations collapsed as the Vong's biological weapons chewed through hulls and circuitry with equal hunger. The military scrambled to respond. Starfighters launched from underground hangars. Anti-air platforms activated. Local security forces took to the skyways. But the enemy didn't come in fleets. They came in storms. Vong warriors dropped from the sky in swarms, some riding living beasts, others embedded in organic capsules that shattered on impact and burst open with venom and smoke. Then came the ground. The lower levels were hit first. The forgotten levels, slums, transit tunnels, refugee shelters. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't just strike military targets, they struck the soul of the city. They sowed panic in the streets, turned towers into hives, unleashed creatures that burrowed into the foundation and began to reshape it. And all the while, they chanted, in a language no one understood, a prayer, a promise, a curse. The Jedi were already spread thin. Luke Skywalker had felt the danger coming, but not this fast, not this deep. He and the remaining council members tried to coordinate a defense, but communications failed. Jedi were cut off. Some held intersections for hours, defending civilians. Others were surrounded and never seen again. Jaina Solo flew above the rooftops, carving through coral skippers. Jason stood beside Leia as the government complex was overrun. Anakin wasn't there. Not yet, but Coruscant was already falling. From the Senate to the Undercity, the planet cracked open like an egg, and from within, the Yuuzhan Vong began to seed something new. It wasn't an invasion. It was a transformation. In the ancient center of the Republic, the war changed shape, no longer about tactics, no longer about strategy. The Vong had not come to negotiate or occupy. They had come to erase. That night, the sky over Coruscant did not shine with stars, it burned, and the galaxy that had once taken comfort in the lights of its capital watched them go out. Coruscant was more than a city, it was a symbol. For thousands of years, it stood as the heart of civilization from the old Republic to the Galactic Empire, and now the fragile experiment known as the New Republic. Laws were written here, wars ended here. Peace had been declared beneath its towering spires. But symbols don't stop invasions. As the Yuuzhan Vong spread through the lower levels, the New Republic's leadership tried to respond. The Senate convened in emergency session, but their voices echoed against crumbling walls. HoloNet broadcasts flickered out mid-speech. Senators screamed at one another, searching for someone to blame, even as their escorts begged them to flee. Chief of State Borsk Failure refused. He stayed in the government complex as the Vong closed in. Some say he believed in duty, others say pride. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered is that when the time came to evacuate, he activated a self-destruct protocol not for survival, but for denial. He chose to die with the Republic's illusion of control. And with his death, the political center of the galaxy collapsed. Across the city, New Republic forces fought block by block, but their tactics were made for order, not chaos. The Vong didn't fight for territory. They fought to desecrate, to unmake. Every victory felt temporary, every retreat permanent. Intelligence networks failed. Commanders lost contact. Civilian routes vanished beneath the growth of Vong coral and war beasts. The military tried to evacuate what they could. Starports flooded with refugees. Skyways clogged with transports. Whole districts became choke points of desperation. Leia Organa Solo helped coordinate extraction zones. She moved from shelter to shelter, guiding survivors even as the buildings collapsed around them. But there were too many, too much fear, too much silence from the chain of command. Elsewhere, Luke ordered Jedi to fall back, not in surrender, in survival. He knew what was coming, and what came wasn't conquest. It was rebirth. The Yuuzhan Vong didn't stop at destruction. They began reshaping the planet, infecting the foundations with living growths, replacing ferrocrete with coral, infusing the air with spores that carried their own atmosphere. Coruscant's skyline began to bend. Its infrastructure softened and turned organic. Machines failed. Towers twisted into thrones of bone and sinew. Streets buckled into trenches lined with teeth. Life was forced to adapt or die. In a matter of days, Coruscant was no longer Coruscant. It was becoming Yuuzhan Tar, the sacred world the Vong had lost in their own galaxy. And now, they would recreate it in the heart of another. The New Republic did not fall in a single moment. It fell in fragments. In the silence of an abandoned Senate chamber, in the blackened ruins of defense centers, in the eyes of refugees who no longer believed in rescue. The war was no longer about restoring balance. It had become something else. And what replaced the Republic wasn't ready. Coruscant did not die quickly. It was not burned from orbit or shattered in a single blast. Instead, it was rewritten cell by cell, street by street, into something that did not belong to the galaxy it once led. The Yuuzhan Vong called it shaping. They did not believe in technology as the Republic understood it. They did not weld metal or wire circuits. They grew their world, fed it, bled into it. Every building that stood on Coruscant became a candidate for transformation. Glass towers twisted into spires of coral. Transports were pulled into tunnels lined with bone. Whole blocks collapsed beneath the weight of creatures that burrowed through stone like worms through soil. They seeded the city with yorick coral, coaxed by shapers and blessed by priests. Each growth obeyed the will of the Vong. Each structure served a purpose. Some were hives, some were hatcheries. Some were simply monuments to pain. Organic tendrils crawled up what remained of the Senate dome. Within days, it became a living shrine. The air changed, the light dimmed. Even the gravity began to feel off. As if the planet was turning into something that had never been meant to exist here. The Vong did not erase the city. They digested it. Below, the underlevels became caverns of darkness, sacrificial pits, breeding grounds. Places where screams echoed, not because of violence alone, but because the victims could not understand what was happening to their world. Machinery refused to function. Communications failed. Droids seized, melted, or exploded on contact with spores engineered to reject all things artificial. The Force itself grew dimmer. Jedi, who remained behind, reported strange sensations. Visions distorted. Their connection to the living world flickered, as if muffled beneath layers of pain. They said the city no longer responded to them. That it moved on its own, conscious, hungry, unpredictable. The transformation was not just physical, it was spiritual. To the Yuuzhan Vong, this was their home reborn. Yuuzhan Tar, a sacred name, once lost to destruction in their own galaxy, now resurrected in the heart of their enemy. They believed the gods had granted them victory. That this living planet was proof that pain led to purpose. That history could be remade so long as enough blood was offered. And the blood was offered freely. Not by their own, but by the world they had conquered. Civilians who could not escape were enslaved or sacrificed. Others were used in experiments, grafted with living tissue, reshaped into mockeries of form. Some were left to wander the ruins, changed beyond recognition, no longer belonging to any species at all. Above it all, the Vong sang songs of praise, of devotion, of triumph. Their words echoed through chambers of coral and bone, carried on winds that no longer smelled of steel and smog, but of ash and decay. Coruscant was gone, not forgotten, but consumed. And what stood in its place would haunt the galaxy long after the war had ended. At the center of what Coruscant once was, a new throne was raised. It wasn't built with stone or forged from iron. It was grown layer by layer, shaped from the bones of great beasts and the hardened sinew of long-dead servants. A monument to pain, to conquest, to prophecy fulfilled. And seated upon it was Shimra Jamani, supreme overlord of the Yuuzhan Vong. He did not speak often. His presence was enough, towering, cloaked in living armor, surrounded by high priests and shapers who had mutilated themselves in acts of devotion. His body bore the marks of thousands of scars, not for decoration but for faith. each wound a story, each pain a truth. To the Vong, he was the voice of the gods. To the galaxy, he was the death of reason. From this throne, he declared Yuuzhan Reborn, no longer a memory of the world they had lost, but a new creation grown in the corpse of the enemy's capital. He ordered great gatherings, ceremonies, sacrifices. The transformation was not yet complete, he said. The planet still remembered its old name. But that memory would fade, as all weakness must. Shimra did not govern like a strategist. He governed like a prophet. His orders were not based on logic, but on vision dreams he claimed were delivered by the gods themselves. Visions of fire, of broken stars, of Jedi kneeling in chains. And those beneath him obeyed. Even Nominor, once a subtle manipulator in the shadows, now stood in the open as a servant of Shimra's will. He had played his part well. Sabotage, division, collapse. But the time for subversion was over. Now, it was conquest. The Yuuzhan Vong held Coruscant. And from there, they reached for everything else. Shimra ordered the final phase to begin, not the capture of more planets, but the purification of them. Vong forming. The same process that had consumed Coruscant would now be used across the mid-rim and beyond. They would make the galaxy theirs not through politics or borders, but through biology, through reshaping. And all resistance would be erased. The Jedi, scattered and wounded, felt the weight of this shift. Coruscant had always been their anchor, not just in structure, but in spirit. It was where the temple had once stood, where generations had trained, where Luke had rebuilt the Order from the ashes of the Empire. Now, it was hollow, alive, but unwelcoming. The Force still moved, but unnaturally twisted by pain, bent by hands that did not understand its will. Some Jedi refused to believe it, others broke in silence. The Republic, what remained of it, no longer knew where to stand. Their heart was gone, their leaders were lost, and their enemy now ruled from the ruins. The throne beneath the ruins was not just a seat of power. It was a warning that nothing sacred would be spared, and that the galaxy's darkest hour had only just begun. Jacen Solo vanished in a moment no one saw clearly. 1 second, he was fighting alongside his friends, holding the line long enough for refugees to escape. The next, the battlefield erupted into chaos. Coral skippers diving through smoke, Vong warriors charging with amphistaffs raised, the air alive with screams and fire. In the confusion, a single blast rocked the ground beneath him, throwing him off balance, sending him into a cloud of dust thick enough to hide entire armies. When the dust cleared, Jacen was gone. Jaina searched frantically. She scanned the skyways, the wreckage, the broken terrain left behind by Vong growths. She called his name through comms that only returned static. The Force itself felt scattered, confused. She sensed echoes of pain, fear. Then, nothing. For the Jedi, that nothing was the worst sign. Anakin tried to go after him immediately, ready to tear through Vong lines just to bring his brother home. But the retreat was already underway, and Luke held him back. They had lost too many. They couldn't lose another. Anakin felt that decision like a blade. It would haunt him. But Jacen wasn't dead. He awoke in darkness. Not the absence of light, the absence of space. He was suspended inside a gel-like substance, his arms bound by living tendrils that tightened whenever he struggled. The air was humid, warm, metallic. He could taste it, the smell of decay and life intertwined. He tried to breathe deeper, but the air grew thinner the more he panicked. He reached for the Force. Nothing answered. Not silence, something worse, a sense of being sealed inside a void, cut off from the galaxy he knew, as if someone had wrapped a wall around his very spirit. He was not alone. A voice came first, soft, calm, almost amused. "Awake so soon?" The fluid around him shifted as the containment membrane opened. He collapsed onto a floor of living tissue, coughing, gasping, trying to understand where he was. Organic walls pulsed like a heartbeat. Shadows moved as if the ship itself were breathing. Vergier stepped into view. Jason recognized her instantly. The missing Jedi Knight. The one lost years earlier beyond known space. The one no one expected to see again. But the creature standing before him was not the teacher he had imagined. Her eyes were sharp, ancient, and unsettlingly sad. She did not offer comfort. She did not explain herself. She simply watched. "You survived," she said lightly. "Not everyone does." Jason tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Vergier didn't help him up. She simply waited until he steadied himself. When he asked where he was, she answered with a truth wrapped in cruelty. "You are in the hands of the Yuuzhan Vong, and they are deciding what to make of you." He felt the fear then, not for himself, but for what he might reveal. For the Jedi, for his family, for the entire galaxy. He reached for the Force again, desperate for even the faintest whisper. Nothing. Vergier stepped closer and whispered, "The Force is not gone. You simply cannot touch it. Not yet." Jason didn't know whether she meant it as comfort or threat. Outside the chamber, Vong warriors gathered. Their armor clacked, their amphistaffs hissed. They spoke of him like prey, like material, like an opportunity. Jason's solo had been captured not to be executed, but to be studied, to be reshaped, to be unmade. And in that moment, the moment he truly understood what had happened, the war changed for him forever. Jason expected pain, but not like this. Not as a tool, but as a lesson. Not as punishment, but as philosophy. Vergier did not strike him. She didn't scream. She didn't chain him to the walls or force him to speak. She simply kept him confined, starved, and alone, and visited him every day to ask questions that sounded like riddles. What do you fear? What is the difference between pain and clarity? Where does your strength come from, Jason? And when he didn't answer, or when he answered too quickly, the Yuuzhan Vong came. They strapped him down to slabs of living tissue that trembled beneath his skin. They fed him toxins that lit his nerves on fire. They implanted living creatures into his body, then removed them before they could kill him. They watched his breathing, studied his screams, and when he blacked out, they brought him back. Always back. Pain, Vergier said, was not cruelty, it was instruction. Suffering, she told him, was truth. She taught him that his identity, Jedi, Solo, son of Leia, brother of Anakin, was an illusion, a mask. That everything he believed about good and evil, light and dark, the Force and himself, had been handed to him without question. "Why do you follow the Jedi Code?" she asked. "Because it is true, or because you were told it was?" At first, Jason resisted, he argued. He held on to the code, the teachings, the lessons he had been raised on. But Vergier was patient, and the pain never stopped. She starved him until food lost its taste, cut him off from the Force until silence felt like home, deprived him of time, light, gravity, orientation. The days blurred, his body weakened, his mind stretched. And then she offered kindness. Not relief, not comfort, just small mercies. Water when he didn't ask, a blanket when he stopped shivering, a word of praise when he admitted he was angry. She was never cruel, never warm, always calm, and always watching. "You think the Jedi know the truth," she whispered one day, "but they only know their fear." Jacen began to lose his sense of right and wrong, not because he wanted to, but because everything around him was designed to unmake his certainty. Vergier told him that the Force did not choose sides, that it had no light, no dark, only will, only balance, and the Jedi, in their fear of the dark, had lost their understanding of the whole. It was seductive, because it wasn't entirely wrong. Jacen had always questioned, always doubted. Now, those doubts had space to grow. The code had told him to resist fear, to act with serenity, but Vergier said fear was natural. That peace wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the acceptance of it. She never forced him to agree. She only made it harder for him to hold on to what he once believed. And in time, Jacen began to listen. Not because he trusted her, but because nothing else made sense anymore. The Force was still there, distant, quiet, but it had changed. Or perhaps he had. Either way, the silence had become bearable, then familiar, then inviting. Vergier smiled, not because she had broken him, but because he was beginning to break himself. Jacen did not realize the moment he began to break. It didn't happen during the worst of the torture, when his body writhed against restraints that felt like living bone. It didn't happen when the Vong carved symbols into his skin, letting blood fall for their gods. Nor did it happen when they drugged him until the world blurred into colors he didn't recognize. The breaking came in silence. After days, maybe weeks, Jacen stopped counting time. His cell no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the only place in the galaxy that made sense. The outside world had become abstract, distant, unreal. The Jedi Order felt like a dream he barely remembered. Faces blurred, voices dimmed. Even Anakin and Jaina drifted to the edges of his memory. Pain had become normal. Stillness had become a companion. And Vergier had become a guide. She visited him during the quiet moments, not to debate, not to scold, simply to sit. Sometimes she didn't speak for hours. She let the silence settle like dust around him. And in that silence, Jacen felt a strange clarity, not comfort, but understanding. Pain, she said, revealed truth. But it wasn't the pain itself that broke him. It was what came afterward. The Vong placed him inside the embrace of pain, a living torture device that wrapped around him like the limbs of some ancient creature. It stretched him, bent him, tightened around his ribs until breathing felt like drowning. The first time, he screamed until his voice failed. The 10th time, he no longer screamed. The embrace learned his body, adjusted, moved with precision, searching for whatever resistance remained. It didn't want to kill him. It wanted to change him, to reshape the balance of fear and endurance within him until he became something new. Vergier watched his reactions with the focus of a teacher observing a student's first lesson. "What do you cling to?" she asked softly. "What anchors you when everything else is taken?" Jacen didn't know. He had once answered with truth, with love, with the will of the Force. Now, all he felt was the question echoing inside him. The Vong intensified their methods. They exposed him to hallucinogenic toxins that bent his perception. They fed him creatures that altered his senses, forcing him to adapt to realities that shifted by the hour. Sometimes he felt weightless, other times crushed. Sometimes he couldn't distinguish his own thoughts from the whispers of the creatures embedded in the walls. With every shift, Vergeray asked the same question. Who are you without the Force? He tried to answer. He couldn't. One day, during a rare moment of quiet, Jason broke down. He sobbed, not from the pain, but from the fear that nothing he once believed mattered anymore. He said he didn't know what was real. He didn't know what was right. He didn't know why he should hold on. Vergeray kneeled beside him and whispered, "Good. Now you can begin." Jason hated her then. Not because she had caused his suffering, but because she understood him too well. She saw the doubts he had buried for years, the questions he had never dared ask, and she used them like blades. Slowly, his identity unraveled. Not violently, quietly. His certainty faded first. His anger second. His fear last of all, because fear had become so constant he forgot it was there. In its place, something new began to form. A hollow space where the Force used to speak. A place ready to be filled. But filled with what? Jason didn't know. Not yet. Jason's solo didn't escape. He was released. The Yuuzhan Vong had no more use for him. The tests were complete. The pain had served its purpose. The Shapers had taken all they needed: his thoughts, his limits, his fears. The priests had named him, whispered his fate in chants he couldn't understand. And Vergeray, she had finished her lesson. He was brought to the surface of Yuuzhan Tar, the world that had once been Coruscant, and left on the edge of a battlefield. No chains, no guards. Just a single breath of freedom in a city that no longer remembered what freedom meant. He stumbled through the ruins. Every step felt unreal. His muscles ached from disuse. His skin carried scars shaped like questions. The Force whispered at the edge of his awareness, faint and hesitant, like a friend unsure whether it had been betrayed. Then the Jedi found him. Jaina was the first to reach him. Her voice cracked as she called his name. She didn't know whether to hold him or steady him. He didn't speak. Not at first. Not because he didn't recognize her, but because he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be anymore. They brought him back to the Jedi, to Luke, to the war. But Jason didn't return with answers. He returned with something colder. He said he had survived. That Vergeray had taught him things he didn't yet know how to explain. That the Vong were more complex than the galaxy realized. That pain could bring clarity. That identity was not permanent, only chosen. The Council tried to debrief him. Luke asked gentle questions. So did Silgal. They wanted to understand what he had been through. But Jason's answers were distant, vague, detached. He spoke with the calm of someone who had accepted too much, who had gone too far inside himself and come back with fewer pieces than he started with. Some of the Jedi were relieved. Others were afraid. Anakin looked at him and saw a stranger behind his brother's eyes. Jaina watched him from a distance, trying to see the cracks. She didn't find them, but she felt them. And Vergeray disappeared. She left before Jason could ask her what came next, before he could understand whether she had helped him or destroyed him. Her voice remained in his mind, like a whisper in the Force. You are what you choose to become. In time, Jason returned to the field. He fought again. He saved lives. But something had changed in how he held his lightsaber, how he looked at enemies, how he moved through the Force. There was no hatred, but there was no innocence either. His choices grew quieter, his questions sharper. He no longer needed the Jedi to tell him what was right. And that scared them more than anything. Because Jason had seen the inside of the void. He had lived without the Force. He had survived without identity. And now, he understood that survival did not require truth, only belief. The war continued. The galaxy burned. But in its heart walked a Jedi who had touched darkness, not with rage but with curiosity. He didn't fall. Not yet. But the path he walked now, no one else could follow. Mercra was never meant to be a battlefield. It was a place of shadows, dense forests, ancient roots, and the flicker of Ysalamiri creatures that could push the Force away like a breath against glass. For years, smugglers and bounty hunters had used its presence to evade Jedi censors. But now, it was something far more dangerous. It was the breeding ground of Voxine. Creatures twisted by Yuuzhan Vong shaping, engineered specifically to hunt Jedi. They didn't need to see their targets. They could feel them. Their screams echoed with something unnatural, part predator, part vengeance. Every Jedi death fed their instinct. And the Vong had made hundreds. When the reports reached the Jedi Council, they understood the stakes. If the Voxine were allowed to spread, no Jedi in the galaxy would be safe. They wouldn't just lose the war. They would lose the future. The Voxine Queen had been traced to Mercra, a nest hidden deep within the forest world, protected by Vong forces, shaped terrain, and the Ysalamiri's dead zone in the Force. Sending anyone was a risk. Sending a strike team of Jedi felt like a death sentence. But there was no other option. Anakin Solo volunteered to lead it. He didn't hesitate, not because he wanted glory, not because he sought revenge, but because he understood something the others wouldn't say out loud, that someone had to do it. And the younger Jedi trusted him. They followed him. So they went. 17 Jedi, most of them barely out of their teens, some of them still uncertain in the Force, some already hardened by war. Among them were Jason and Jaina, Zek, Tahiri, Tenel Ka, Lobaka, Raynar Thul, Gana Rysard, Alama Ra, and others who would not be remembered in the same breath, but who mattered just the same. They called themselves the Strike Team. No reinforcements, no fallback, no rescue. Just a mission: infiltrate the world ship above Mercra, find the Voxine Queen, and kill it before the Vong could unleash her progeny across the stars. The preparations were rushed. Luke Skywalker tried to talk Anakin out of it, not with authority, but with fear. Leia begged for him to wait. Han said nothing, just stared at his son, like a man trying to memorize something he knew he was going to lose. But Anakin smiled. Not with confidence, with peace. He told them he would return, that he believed in the team, that the Force would guide them. Then he boarded the ship, and the door closed behind them. As the strike team entered hyperspace, the galaxy kept moving. Other battles were fought, plans made, worlds lost and reclaimed. But for the Jedi, time stopped. Every hour was counted. Every silence between updates became heavier. The truth was clear: this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a sacrifice. And every Jedi who stepped onto that ship knew it. But they went anyway, because some battles aren't fought to survive. Some are fought so others can. Anakin Solo did not enter Mercra expecting to die. He entered believing he could save everyone else. From the moment the strike team landed on the world ship, the air changed. The corridors pulsed like veins. Every surface felt alive. And somewhere deep inside the structure, The Voxing Queen screamed a sound that made even seasoned Jedi freeze. The assault began the moment they stepped forward. Vong warriors surged from the shadows, their Vonduan crab armor glistening, amphistaffs snapping with venomous hunger. The Jedi fought back with precision born from desperation. Blades flashed in tight corridors. Blast of fire ricocheted off living walls. The ship shuddered with every blow. Anakin led the charge. He always did. His instincts were sharper than anyone else's. He moved with a clarity that came not from the code, but from the raw truth of survival. He was the first to sense ambushes, the first to strike, the first to shield the younger Jedi when the corridors erupted in violence. But Murkra was ready for them. Every step they took deeper into the world ship, the resistance doubled. Warriors, traps, shaped creatures all drawn by the presence of Jedi. And the Ysalamiri's reach meant the Force flickered unpredictably, surging and fading like a broken current. Anakin felt the danger climbing. He kept moving. It happened in the central chamber, during a push toward the Queen's nest. A single Vong warrior, larger, faster, burning with fanatic devotion, broke through the defensive line. He struck Anakin hard, knocking him into a wall of living coral. Before he could recover, the warrior stabbed him with a blast bug, exploding against his side. Pain tore through his ribs. His breath vanished. The room blurred. But the fight didn't stop. Voxen poured into the chamber, their claws scraped against durasteel. Their screams stabbed through the air. The strike team faltered. And Anakin stood up. He didn't think. He acted. The Force surged through him, burning hot, burning bright, brighter than it ever had before. It filled every wound, every breath, every heartbeat. He became motion. He became light. He cut through enemies with impossible speed, guiding the team away from collapse. He shouted orders, held the line, forced the Vong back step by step. Even wounded, he was the anchor, the single point of hope in a room drowning in death. But the light came at a cost. Every use of the Force drained him faster. Every movement sent fire through his shattered bones. He could feel his strength slipping, but he refused to let go. Not while the others depended on him. Not while the mission remained unfinished. Then the moment came. He felt the last reserves inside him fade. Not quietly, like a star collapsing. He fell to one knee. The others screamed his name, Jason, Jaina, Tahiri. But Anakin only smiled faint, tired, true. He told them to go, to finish the mission, to survive. He held the Vong off long enough for them to escape. Long enough for the Queen to be killed. Long enough for the galaxy to gain one final chance. When he finally collapsed, the Force rippled outward, not in darkness, but in light. A final stand. A final breath. A final act of love. When Anakin Solo fell, something changed in the Jedi. Grief was expected, pain was inevitable. But what came after was different, a quiet resolve, born not from hope, but from necessity. The galaxy had lost a light it could not replace. And in that emptiness, the Jedi understood that open battle would no longer save anyone. They had to become shadows. The strike team barely escaped Murkra. Their victory, the death of the Voxen Queen, came at a cost too heavy to name. Some were wounded, some broken. And some, like Jaina, seemed to leave a part of themselves behind in the burning corridors of that world ship. Jason did not return with them. He vanished in the chaos, captured before they could reach him. Jaina held the truth differently. She didn't cry. She didn't speak of it. She simply closed herself off. as if silence were armor. Luke Skywalker felt the shift. He stood before the Jedi and saw exhaustion in their eyes. Children who had fought battles meant for masters. Masters who had lost faith in their own teachings. The order was strained, scattered, hunted. But the war could not wait for healing. So Luke changed the strategy. Public missions were abandoned. Jedi cells formed across the galaxy. Small, hidden groups moving between systems the Vong had overlooked. They carried no banners. They announced no presence. Their victories were not celebrated. Their losses were not recorded. They moved quietly, struck quickly, disappeared completely. Some sabotaged world ships from the inside, planting explosives deep in their coral cores. Others liberated prisoners before they could be taken for shaping. A few infiltrated Vong ranks, using disguises and stolen biots to blend into their camps. None of it was glorious. All of it was necessary. Ghana Rysode, once arrogant and unsure, grew into a quiet leader. His mission saved thousands. Corran Horn brought his precision to covert strikes, dismantling Vong supply lines with surgical efficiency. Kip Duran, though still controversial, used his experience to train Jedi in hit-and-run tactics, fast, brutal, decisive. Even Jaina found a new purpose. She joined Rogue Squadron again, but she flew differently now. Her maneuvers were colder, more precise. She didn't chase kills. She hunted opportunities, weak points in Vong formations, exposed wings, predictable retreat paths. Her victories were small, quick, necessary. Each one carried Anakin's memory. Each one felt like repayment for a debt she could never settle. Leia, watching from the political shadows, gathered alliances piece by piece. She met with senators, survivors, rebels, warlords, anyone willing to resist. The New Republic had fractured, but a new coalition was forming in its wake, the Galactic Alliance. Not perfect, not stable, but determined. They needed the Jedi, and the Jedi needed time. These silent victories, the saboteur missions, the prisoner rescues, the broken world ships were not turning the war. They were slowing the fall. For the first time, the Yuuzhan Vong hesitated. Their commanders grew cautious. Their priests questioned the will of their gods. Their warriors sensed something they had never felt from Jedi before. Purpose shaped by pain. The Vong did not fear the Jedi yet, but they noticed them. And in the shadows of the galaxy, unnoticed victories began to add up, not loud enough to win the war, but enough to change its rhythm. Enough to remind the galaxy that even in the darkest night, light can still move unseen. Fear was not something the Yuuzhan Vong understood. They were shaped in pain, raised to worship agony, trained to kill without question. The idea of fear, true, paralyzing fear, was weakness, and weakness was reserved for others. But something had changed. When the Voxine Queen died, their perfect weapon died with her. When Anakin Solo fell, he became a martyr the Jedi would never forget. And when the survivors of Merkura disappeared into the shadows only to strike harder, faster, quieter than before, the Vong began to feel the limits of their power. It wasn't immediate. It began with confusion. Scouting vessels vanished on the edges of controlled space. Supply lines collapsed without warning. World ships began encountering minefields in lanes once thought safe. And then came the whispers from spies, from shapers, even from low-ranking warriors of Jedi attacks where there were no Jedi. Something unseen was moving through their territory. And then, something louder happened. A new Republic strike force led by the newly formed Galactic Alliance struck at Ebak 9, a mining installation the Vong had turned into a hidden base. The attack was expected. The trap was not. Leia Organa Solo had helped plan it. Wedge Antilles had approved it. The Jedi executed it. Jaina Solo led the assault from the front. They lured the Vong in, made them believe they held the upper hand. And then, with corridors rigged, with demolitions placed deep beneath the surface, the Jedi collapsed the entire installation on top of the Vong fleet. Thousands of warriors, dozens of ships, gone, and with them, the War Master. Savong La, the Vong's most terrifying military mind, died in the wreckage. That was the moment. The turning point. Fear didn't erupt. It whispered. It bled into strategy meetings, into priest sermons, into the eyes of sub-commanders who no longer believed their gods could protect them. The Jedi were still few, still hunted, still scarred. But they had made the Vong bleed. Not in battle, in belief. From this point forward, the Vong war machine slowed. Not because they lacked strength, but because they no longer believed themselves untouchable. They double-checked their flanks. They grew more paranoid. Even the Supreme Overlord began preparing fallback positions, speaking in riddles of sacrifice and prophecy. The Jedi saw it. They had not won, but they had hurt something sacred. Jacen Solo was still missing. Anakin was still dead. The galaxy remained carved into battle lines and refugee corridors. But something invisible had shifted, something no one could name, but everyone could feel. For the first time in the war, the invaders weren't just advancing. They were looking over their shoulders. Fear doesn't win wars, but it changes them. And from that moment on, the Yuuzhan Vong gods of pain, lords of death, masters of destruction finally learned what it felt like to be hunted. There were no alarms, no battleships firing from orbit, no grand announcement of treachery. The end of the Yuuzhan Vong's dominion began with a thought, one that did not belong to them. Deep beneath the surface of Yuuzhan Tar, within a chamber shaped by living tissue and grown from pain itself, the world brain stirred. It had no name, not like a being of flesh, but it had been conditioned to obey, to mold the surface of Coruscant into the image of the gods. Every reef it formed, every wound it opened in the earth, was part of a sacred plan. But something was wrong. It had been Jacen Solo who first spoke to it, who reached into the labyrinth of its mind during his captivity. He didn't threaten it. He didn't scream. He simply asked questions. And that was more dangerous than any blade. For a creature born to serve, to question is heresy. The world brain's thoughts, if they could be called, that became hesitant. It began misaligning root networks. It allowed certain corridors to collapse. It delayed the reshaping of key structures above. It told no one, because even if it did not understand the concept of rebellion, it was already acting it out. On the surface, Supreme Overlord Shimra felt it in subtle tremors. Buildings grew at the wrong angle. Sacred architecture decayed faster than expected. His shapers were blamed. Sacrifices were made. But the problem did not leave. It deepened. Unseen, unnoticed by most, the world brain started listening for Jacen again. It remembered the stillness in his presence, the absence of the god's pain. It remembered doubt, and doubt, once planted, does not die quietly. The Yuuzhan Vong had trained the world brain to see dissent as disease, but this felt like clarity. The Jedi were not watching the surface anymore. They had slipped back into myth. The war had burned too hot for too long, and now all sides were bleeding from within. The living city was collapsing on itself, not through assault, but through disobedience. Jacen had not told the world brain to betray. He had only planted a possibility. What if obedience was not the same as survival? And now, that seed began to take root. The living towers groaned in agony. The world brain misfired instructions to coral growths, causing districts to twist inward. The skies above turned dense with bioengineered spores, blocking signals between Vong patrols. None of this looked like war, but it was. In truth, the most dangerous front was no longer space or sky. It was thought. It was belief. And for the first time, the Yuuzhan Vong's perfect order faced a threat that could not be sacrificed or burned away. It could only be accepted. Shimra did not know the world brain was lost. He believed he still held its loyalty. He believed the sacred shaping would continue. He believed he was still in control. But beneath his feet, the world he claimed was already listening to another voice. A voice that spoke not of gods, but of peace. And the world brain born from obedience, shaped by terror, began to realize it no longer wanted to serve a master who feared the truth. Because if the gods demanded blindness, then perhaps they were never gods at all. He had been broken once, tortured, reshaped, left in the dark long enough to forget what light even was. And yet Jacen Solo emerged, not whole, not innocent, but aware of pain, of truth, of the thin line between survival and surrender. Now he walked through the ruins of Yuuzhan Vong, not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as a witness. The world around him pulsed like an open wound. Every structure breathed. Every tower hummed with the echoes of suffering. And yet, Jacen wasn't afraid. He had already lived through worse. The worst thing the Yuuzhan Vong could do had already been done. He approached the world brain in silence. No weapons, no commands, just presence. The creature remembered him, not in words, not in images, but in sensation. In contrast, Jacen did not burn with fanaticism. He did not demand anything. He was still. And that stillness was everything the Vong were not. Shimra's orders echoed across the city. Crush the heretics, silence dissent, destroy the Jedi. But Jacen did not come to destroy. He came to ask. The world brain hesitated. It had once known certainty, purpose that had brought comfort. But now, each command from Shimra was met with confusion. The gods called for obedience, and yet their will led only to destruction. Yuuzhan Vong was dying. The surface bled. The people wailed in hunger, and the Shapers could no longer heal the pain. Jacen reached out not with his hand, but with the Force. He didn't force the creature to listen. He allowed it to. And what it heard was simple. You are not alone. It wasn't a revelation. It wasn't an answer. But to a being built in isolation, trained to serve, and denied compassion, it was enough. Shimra had believed control would never break. That fear and faith were enough to bind even a world. But what he never understood was that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits in silence until it is safe to be heard. And Jacen was that silence. He told the world brain what was coming, that Shimra's forces would fall, that the Jedi were not just warriors, they were seekers of balance, that life did not need to suffer to be sacred. The world brain trembled, not in fear, in choice. It had never been given one before. And now, for the first time, it did not send a warning to Shimra. It did not betray Jacen. It listened. It shifted. And through its network, through the veins of the living city, it began to unravel the supreme Overlord's illusions. Across Yuuzhan Vong, growth halted, streets twisted unpredictably, communications between squads failed, coral warships refused commands, the planet itself turned silent. Shimra didn't understand. He raged, he killed his advisors, he cursed the gods, but it was already too late. The city, the world he had conquered was no longer his. And at the heart of it stood Jacen Solo, not in triumph, but in truth, because in that moment, he understood something neither the Jedi nor the Yuuzhan Vong had fully seen. Sometimes, you don't have to fight a war to win it. Sometimes, you just have to stop obeying it. The final battle for Yuuzhan Vong did not begin with a charge, it began with doubt. Across the living city, the Yuuzhan Vong felt something they had never experienced: hesitation. Orders from Shimra no longer reached every squad. Entire battalions found themselves isolated in streets that twisted unexpectedly, tunnels collapsing before they could advance, bridges curling inward like dying vines. The world itself betrayed them, and the Jedi moved through that confusion like ghosts. Luke Skywalker led the strike force, calm, focused, carrying the weight of every fallen knight behind his eyes. Mara Jade walked beside him, her steps steady, her blade sharp. Jaina flew overhead, guiding squadrons through skies darkened by bio-engineered clouds. Corran Horn, Tahiri Vela, Kyle Katarn all scattered across the surface, striking at Vong patrols, freeing prisoners, clearing paths. The Galactic Alliance fleet descended through the atmosphere, firing controlled bursts to avoid hitting civilians. Starfighters weaved between towers of coral and bone. The smell of smoke, blood, and living tissue filled the wind, and beneath it all, the heartbeat of Yuuzhan Vong faltered. The world brain was resisting. Shimra felt it. His throne room quaked with each tremor of rebellion. Priests chanted louder, begging the gods to restore control. Shapers sliced open their own flesh in desperation, seeking visions through agony. But no visions came. Only silence, only fear. Shimra ordered his elite guards to defend the citadel, massive warriors encased in Vonduan crab armor, armed with amphistaffs dripping venom. They were the strongest of the Vong, trained from birth to die without hesitation. And now, for the first time, they hesitated too. Because Yuuzhan Vong was changing around them. As the Jedi pushed deeper toward the heart of the world, pathways opened at their approach. Walls shifted aside, entire districts rearranged as if guided by an invisible hand. The world brain was no longer simply resisting Shimra. It was helping the Jedi. Luke felt it. The Force, once muffled by pain and shaping, surged through him like breath returning to a drowning man. The planet's suffering still weighed heavy, but beneath it was something new: hope. Not loud, not bright, but present. And that was enough. Anakin's ghost lingered in the hearts of those who fought. His sacrifice had broken the Voxine. His death had forged the resolve that carried them now. Jaina felt him most of all. As she flew above the citadel, diving between coral spires, she whispered her brother's name, not for guidance, but for strength. On the ground, Jacen moved separately from the others, guided by the world brain's shifting networks. He advanced through corridors that rewrote themselves in his path. He wasn't racing to kill Shimra. He was walking toward a truth only he could face. But the Jedi outside still fought through fire and blood. The citadel gates erupted open as the Alliance ground forces pushed forward. Vong warriors charged with fanatical determination. Amphistaffs clashed with lightsabers, razor bugs sliced the air. Jedi fell, soldiers fell, but the line didn't break. Because they weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting for the right to breathe again. The right to stand without fear. The right to end a war that had devoured too many. Above the battlefield, world ships circled in confusion. Some fired blindly. Others drifted helplessly as their coral hulls cracked under sudden biological failure. The Vong fleet wasn't losing because of superior firepower. It was losing because its foundation, its faith, its unity, its world had been shattered from within. And in the moment the Citadel doors finally fell, the truth was clear. The war would not be decided by strength. It would be decided by belief. And the Yuuzhan Vong had just lost theirs. Shimra was waiting. Seated upon a throne of pulsing bone and twisted coral, the supreme overlord of the Yuuzhan Vong stared across his chamber. Behind him, the twin-headed monstrosity known as Onimi whispered like a shadow clinging to flesh, a constant presence in his ear. The citadel had been breached. The world brain was rebelling. The gods had gone silent, but Shimra didn't feel fear. He felt rage. He would die before surrendering. When Luke Skywalker entered the chamber, time seemed to slow. The Force was quiet, not gone, but holding its breath. Across the galaxy, every soul, every star, every whisper of memory leaned toward this moment. Luke wasn't here to avenge a single life. He was here to end an age of suffering. And Shimra knew it. The two did not speak. There were no final threats, no declarations of war or faith. Only the hum of the lightsaber, as Luke ignited it, and the deep rumble of the living citadel shifting beneath their feet. They fought like opposites made to collide. Luke, graceful and still, channeled the calm fury of the Force. Shimra, massive and wild, lashed out with raw power. The Overlord's amphistaff struck with venomous speed, his armored limbs crashing down like falling mountains. But Luke moved through it, not as a warrior, but as the eye of a storm. And in that storm, the truth became clear. Shimra had never ruled the Yuuzhan Vong alone. It had always been Onimi. The jester, the shamed one, the one no one saw. As Shimra fell, cut down by the blade of a Jedi who had seen too much loss, Onimi emerged from the shadows, not laughing, not screaming, just weeping. His mind, twisted by genetic experiments, had found communion with the world brain. He had touched something deeper, and it had driven him mad. But it had also made him powerful. He faced Jacen solo. And for the first time since his capture, Jacen did not hesitate. He did not fight with anger. He did not call on vengeance. He simply listened. Not to Onimi's words, but to the Force, to the deep current that flowed beneath life and death, war and peace, victory and sacrifice. And he let go. Jacen became still, not defenseless, but open. He absorbed Onimi's madness without letting it infect him. He saw every pain the Vong had inflicted, every lie they believed, every scar they bore. He saw the shamed ones, the lost ones, the faithful, and he understood. This was not about who won. This was about who could forgive. In that moment of pure presence, Jacen channeled the Force in a way no one had in generations. Not as a weapon, but as a truth. Onimi fell, not slain in combat, but unraveled his mind and body, unable to survive the light Jacen had become. And with that, the war ended. The world brain went silent. The citadel stopped moving. The surviving Vong dropped their weapons. Many wept. Others prayed. A few screamed, but none fought. Not anymore. Across the galaxy, the news spread like a soft breath. Yuuzhan had fallen, but the galaxy still stood. Jaina flew back through skies that no longer fired. Tahiri collapsed beside Anakin's empty robes. Luke sheathed his saber without ceremony. Jacen walked out alone. The Alliance raised no flags. The Jedi claimed no throne. There was no celebration. Only quiet. Only peace. And in that quiet, the Force stirred not in triumph, but in healing. Because, for the first time in years, the galaxy exhaled and dared to dream again. The war was over, but peace did not feel like victory. When the Yuuzhan Vong finally surrendered, the galaxy did not erupt in joy. There were no grand parades or declarations of triumph, only silence, the kind that follows something too big to understand. Cities lay in ruin, whole systems no longer existed, and the people who remained were not the same. Across Coruscant, or what was left of its survivors, walked streets they no longer recognized. The world had been reshaped into something alive, something alien. The Vong called it Yuuzhan. Even after their surrender, the world pulsed with their legacy. Organic towers writhed in place. The sky carried the scent of spores and ash. And beneath every footstep was the memory of someone who didn't make it home. The Jedi had lost many, too many. Anakin Solo was gone, Miko Reglia, Ulaha Kore, Ikrit. The list stretched far past the Order's new ranks. Even the survivors were haunted. Jacen Solo walked again among his friends, but his silence lingered. Jaina returned from battle sharper, colder. Kip Duron stood quietly at funerals and said nothing. Each had carried the war in their own way, and none of them came back untouched. Luke Skywalker watched over it all, not with relief, but with caution. He had led the Jedi through something no one could have prepared for. And now, in a galaxy trying to rebuild, he saw fractures in places no healer could reach. The Force itself had felt distant in those final years, obscured, changed, as if it, too, had been wounded by the war. Elsewhere, survivors of the Vong, stripped of their gods, their weapons, their purpose, were placed in isolated regions. The Jedi argued for compassion, others called for exile. Some even whispered about extermination. It was not justice that followed war. It was confusion, fear, and buried resentment. The New Republic had collapsed. A new government, the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, was rising in its place. But trust would take longer than policy, and peace would never be the same. Because everyone who survived had paid a price, and not all of them knew what they had lost yet. The Jedi who survived the Yuuzhan Vong War did not return as the same order that once guarded the Republic. They came back carrying ghosts, quiet, persistent, and heavy. Each night held different scars, but all of them shared the same realization. The galaxy they protected no longer saw them the same way. Some feared them, some blamed them, some expected too much. Jaina Solo became a symbol of resilience, but symbols are not people. Behind every mission report, every tactical success, every respectful nod from Alliance officials, she felt the weight of Anakin's absence. She kept flying because stopping meant remembering, and remembering always hurt. Corran Horn returned to his family, but the calm didn't reach him. He woke at night, expecting to hear Voxin claws scraping along the hull of a world ship. Kip Duron tried to stand taller, to act like the war had sharpened his purpose. But those closest to him saw the truth. He questioned every decision he made, every life he took. every young Jedi he pushed too hard. Tahiri Vela came back changed in ways she couldn't explain. The shaping scars on her mind, the tangled memories of her own thoughts mingled with what the Yuuzhan Vong tried to make her. Those wounds didn't heal. She smiled for others, but she rarely spoke about Murkar. Some wounds were too deep for words. And then there was Jason. To many, he looked healed. He spoke softly. He carried himself with calm. He offered insight the council listened to closely. But those who knew him best sensed something unsettled beneath the surface. Vergeray's lessons lived inside him, quiet, complicated, dangerous. He didn't talk about the embrace of pain. He didn't talk about the moment he broke. But the force around him felt different. Luke sensed it too. He watched his students return from the war with strength and fragility woven together. Their lightsabers still shone bright, but their hearts carried shadows. He didn't judge them. He didn't fear them. But he understood what they didn't yet see. Surviving a war is not the same as healing from it. And healing would take far longer than victory. Peace returned to the galaxy, but inside the Jedi Order, something quieter and far more dangerous began to grow. It didn't start with arguments in the council chamber or open disagreement between masters. It began in thoughts, in whispers, in the moments when Jedi closed their eyes and remembered what it took to survive. The war had changed the Force itself. Some knights felt it flowing more freely than before, as if renewed by sacrifice. Others sensed strain beneath its surface, like a thread pulled too tight. And for a few, especially Jason Solo, it felt like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something none of them could name. Jason tried to meditate, but meditation brought memories. Verger's voice, the embrace of pain. The moment he chose stillness over fear, he questioned every lesson he had ever been taught. Was the Jedi Code enough? Was the light enough? Could peace truly last when conflict always returned? These questions didn't frighten him. They empowered him. For the first time, he felt the Force not as a guide, but as a horizon vast, endless, unexplored. And somewhere inside that horizon, something called to him. Not dark, not light. Something in between. Luke sensed it, not as danger, but as potential. He trusted Jason too much to fear him, yet he watched him closely. Not for signs of corruption, but for signs of certainty, because certainty, after a war like this, could be more dangerous than doubt. Other Jedi felt the shift too. Kyle Katarn trained harder, questioning whether they had grown complacent. Mara Jade grew more protective of Ben, her instincts sharpened by the memory of Yuuzhan Tar. Kenneth Hamner worried the Alliance would use the Jedi as weapons again. Some knights believed the Order needed stricter discipline. Others believed it needed freedom. The seeds weren't planted by malice. They were planted by survival. And survival had taught every Jedi a different lesson. The Council gathered often, speaking of how to rebuild their order. But beneath every calm discussion was the same unspoken truth. The war had ended. The echo of victory had faded. And now came the harder battle, the one fought inside. Because peace doesn't erase darkness. Sometimes it grows it. The war was over. The Yuuzhan Vong laid down their weapons. Their warships fell silent. And across the stars, people began to rebuild. Planets scarred by the war slowly opened themselves to sunlight again. Refugees returned home, some to ruins, some to memories. There were no more battles, no more screams echoing through the Force. But peace is not always quiet. It hums beneath the surface. It hides what hasn't yet healed. The Galactic Alliance replaced the fractured New Republic. Hopeful, idealistic, scarred, it sought to unify systems still raw with grief, still reeling from betrayal. Treaties were signed. Relief efforts surged across the Mid-Rim. Medical fleets rebuilt what could be rebuilt. But beneath the surface of every speech, there was fear. Fear that the Vong might return. Fear that someone else might rise. Fear that peace, again, was just the time between tragedies. And within the Jedi Order, questions deepened. They had won, but at what cost? The Force had grown silent for some, louder for others. Jacen Solo smiled in council meetings, but sometimes wandered the stars alone, chasing something no one else could hear. His mind, once filled with questions, now carried certainty. Calm certainty, stillness, and shadows. Luke Skywalker stood as Grand Master, proud of what his order had endured. But even he admitted to Mara, in a quiet moment, that he didn't know what the future held, only that it felt different. The Yuuzhan Vong who surrendered were not exterminated. They were relocated, guided toward redemption by a vision of balance, guided by Jedi who believed in more than punishment. But not all agreed. Some in the Alliance protested. Some Jedi hesitated. Peace demanded forgiveness, and forgiveness, for some, felt like betrayal. The children who had grown during the war, Ben, Alana, others yet unnamed, would inherit this fragile peace. They would inherit not just the silence, but the silence's weight. The war had changed the galaxy, but the war had also changed the Force. And while the stars burned calmly above, and the wounds of planets slowly closed, in the shadows of thought and power, something else had already begun.